What's up, you guys? Chase the Dark Sage here, and today we are back with another video, and today's video will be a special one. I'm going to be reviewing one of my favorite series of all time, Yu Yu Hakusho. Now, like many of you guys probably, I grew up on Yu Yu Hakusho, so I have a whole nostalgic bias towards it. Obviously pretty favorable because, well, I have a lot of Yu Yu merch. I have the video game on PS2, I have some of the figures, and you know, I'm rocking a Yu Yu Hakusho t-shirt right now. Needless to say, I love Yu Yu Hakusho. But I will say though, my opinions have definitely changed once I actually started reading the manga. Now, if you guys have not been following the channel, or if you're new to the channel, I've been trying to actually review and read every single series that you see on this shelf right here. I know it's a lot. Trust me, if you want to see my manga collection and see actually how many series I have, I'll leave a link in the description down below, and I'll also leave a link to some of the other series I reviewed on the channel so far. But needless to say, Yu Yu Hakusho was one of the series I had to go to because I had to go to Dragon Ball Z and I had to review that, which is my favorite series of all time. So Yu Yu Hakusho, the time was pending on it. You get what I'm saying? It's also the first series that's actually on the shelf back here. So it was time for me to finally get to Yu Yu Hakusho. I couldn't skip over it any longer. And this is a series that's praised by many. And I think the one thing about the anime slash manga community is that a lot more people have actually watched Yu Yu Hakusho than actually have read Yu Yu Hakusho. You get what I'm saying? Yu Yu Hakusho was really popular from the anime, not really the manga. I mean, the manga did get popular during the whole, you know, shutdown era, if you get what I'm talking about. I can't say it because YouTube will demonetize me, but it did get really popular because, well, it was one of those series that was way harder to get than your usual average shonen that was sitting on the shelf. So needless to say, a lot of people either have a bias towards Yu Yu because it was hard to get, or they've actually watched it as a kid, just like I did. But after actually reading the manga and viewing the content and seeing Togashi's, you know, thought process and seeing where he really wanted to take the series and go with the series, I will say my opinion has changed, and I'm glad that I actually read it as an adult because there are themes that I definitely did not get as I was younger. But now that I'm an adult, I kind of have a fully developed brain. I'm kind of smart every now and then, but there are now themes and certain writing elements that I actually pick up on that, well, either are great or some just kind of fall flat. And that's really disappointing for me to say because, like I said, I view Yu Yu Hakusho through my nostalgia tinted glasses. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong that Yu Yu Hakusho can do, even though I did a rewatch of it a few years ago and I still loved it, except for the last arc. That last arc is bad. And trust me, we'll talk about the last arc in this manga as well. It's woo! Trust me, it's not good. Needless to say though, it is time for me to get my critical thinker reader glasses on and tell you guys about one of my favorite series and kind of rip it a new one because I have a lot of thoughts and I have a lot of criticisms about this. And honestly, after reading the series, I have a higher appreciation for Hunter x Hunter. And if you guys know me, I think Hunter x Hunter is super hype and I think it's not that great. But honestly, what Togashi has done with Hunter x Hunter, which I'm actually going to be reading after this, it far exceeds what Yu Yu was trying to attempt, if you get what I'm saying. But before we actually get into it, before we talk about the plot, the characters, the writing, the theming, and the setting itself, go ahead, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, like the video, and follow me on all my other social media platforms. All my links will be in the description down below. So, y'all notice the new mic? Y'all notice it? This was a $700 setup. So I'm gonna need you guys to go ahead and like the video if you haven't already and subscribe to the channel. Help your boy out because the lights are probably gonna turn off really soon if y'all don't. But besides all that, let's actually go ahead and talk about the plot first. And as usual, guys, I will put timestamps in the description down below so you can skip to any part that kind of interests you or parts that you actually want to skip over. This will have spoilers in it because, well, Yu Yu Hakusho is probably older than 50% of my actual audience on this channel. So it's a pretty old series. It's over 20 years old. So it's actually time to deep dive into the series and give you my thoughts. But let's go ahead and start off with the plot. So this manga has 4 major sagas that we'll be talking about. We have the first saga, which is the Spirit Detective Saga, the second, which is the Dark Tournament Saga, third, the Chapter Black Saga, and lastly, the Three Kings Saga, which also includes chapters not pertaining to the actual main narrative of that saga. Now, the Spirit Detective Saga, it's just all right. This arc starts off the series with Yusuke dying, but coming back to life for a second chance by becoming a spirit detective, a person who takes on missions to keep balance between the demons and humans. Now, the first 2 volumes of the series, which is when Yusuke is dead, it's really slow. In fact, it's so slow, it took me about 2 weeks to actually get through 2 volumes, but it actually does kind of pick up once Yusuke comes back to life and starts, forming his friendships with Kuwabara, Hiei, and Kurama. This saga does give a nice feel of Yusuke and him going from task to task while living his everyday life, which we do revisit within the last volumes of the series. Now we gotta talk about a fan favorite, but also my favorite saga in Yu Yu Hakusho, the Dark Tournament Saga. In this saga, Yusuke is revisited by the human-turned-demon Toguro from a mission Yusuke completed in the previous saga. Toguro threatens Yusuke to form a team and enter the Dark Tournament to fight him because he sees the potential Yusuke has to get stronger. Now, I love the Dark Tournament Saga. Some of the fights are dope, Toguro as an antagonist is dope, and some of the fights that our crew members get in are fire. My only problem with this saga is the pacing at times and a writing issue Togashi first introduces that I don't like that he utilizes later on. Overall, there's much to love about this arc, especially the ending. Now it's time to move on to the Chapter Black Saga, and I gotta say that I love the concept for this saga and some of the ideas that Togashi even introduces. They're so fire, but whether he actually executes them well or not, that's a different story. Now this saga introduces Yusuke's predecessor Sensui, a spirit detective turned rogue after witnessing the most inhumane things done by humans, the people he swore to protect from evil. In this saga, Sensui plans to merge the demon plane with Earth as he sees humans are far worse than demons themselves and deserve to be punished. Now I think Togashi was really cooking with this saga. Many things like the psychological aspect of the villain after dealing with the trauma and a self-upholding justice / morale system is a great element if I had to name one. Just like Toguro, Yusuke is faced with an adversary who was once like him but more powerful and has to defeat him in order to save the world. This saga also emphasizes on themes that humans can be more demonic than demons themselves, which creates a dichotomy of save human life or eradicate it from doing further harm. Now, while I think Togashi has some great concepts with this arc, there's plenty of places where he definitely falls flat, especially at the end. That ending is such a doozy. Either way, Chapter Black is a saga people don't talk about enough, with how Togashi really tried to include some hard-hitting concepts and even has a villain confirmed to be gay. Very interesting, very different, and I love it. And now we're finally on to the last saga, which I honestly don't want to talk about this, but for review purposes, I gotta do my job. The Three Kings saga takes place mostly in the demon plane where Yusuke connects with a long-lost ancestor of his. This ancestor turns out to be Raisin, one of the 3 kings of a certain territory in the demon plane. Once Raisin dies from starvation from abstaining from eating humans, it's Yusuke's turn to take up the mantle, but also fight the other kings for sovereignty over the demon plane. Yusuke proposes a tournament between all 3 factions to decide who rules. I hated this saga, and I really mean I hated it. To me, I felt this arc had no purpose, no sense of direction, no good overall theming, and honestly, no concepts that I liked at all. This saga, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic when I say this, is probably the worst last arc that I've ever read in my manga reading lifetime. Now at the end of the saga, it drastically differs from its anime counterpart. In the last volume after the Three Kings tournament, Yusuke actually comes back sooner and ends up solving some spirit cases that don't have any real weight towards them. It just felt like Togashi didn't know when or where to stop Yu Yu, especially since the last part majorly drags. But I will say that it was a nice throwback to the beginning chapters of Yu Yu Hakusho. Overall, this arc was really bad, and I wouldn't even force my worst enemy to read this. Also, this saga committed the most heinous sin that even a demon couldn't do themselves. Togashi cut out Kuwabara in this saga. I wish I could tell you I was playing, but I'm not. If I had to rank these sagas, first up will be the Dark Tournament, with Chapter Black following it very closely. The last 2 in order would be the Spirit Detective saga, and sadly, since this exists, the Three Kings saga. Also, on a side note, if I had to compare the Hunter x Hunter sagas to the Yu Yu ones, I'd say Yorknu would be like the Dark Tournament, where overall the saga is good and well-rounded, while I feel the Chimera Ant arc is like the Chapter Black saga. Better writing and concepts, but it does fizzle out due to minor issues like pacing. Now I know artwork, just like all opinions, are super subjective, but I will say that Togashi at times, he was cooking, and it was some really delicious food. But then at other times, he would be cooking and he would dang near burn the house down. The artwork in this manga could be incredible at times, while at other times, it could look sloppy and just unappealing to look at. And that would be alright if that was the artist's intention. But when I see an incredibly detailed look at one of the antagonists, but then I see sloppy line art in the next page or panel, it just hurts my experience while reading. And I mean sloppy looking line work. I ain't talking about the raw sketch-like drawings Togashi gives us to evoke raw emotion through action, because that's fire. I'm talking about it looks like he drew an outline for something, said he would come back to it, and he actually just forgets about it. To sum up this point, the artwork is super inconsistent. We would get some very high highs, and then we get some very low lows. One thing I do want to say that stood out to me was when Togashi would draw Sensui and Toguro with such magnificent detail, but leave Yusuke a bit more plain and simplistic compared to them. I felt that was a great artistic expression of showcasing how some of these villains can be complex compared to Yusuke's simple nature. There's beauty behind the madness, and Togashi knows how to exhibit that well, when he wants to. Also, you could definitely see where Bleach got its inspiration from, with the focus of the characters on an all-white background in certain panels. It helps us focus on the character and let us know how tense or emotional the situation is. So I have a huge nostalgic bias for these characters because, well, I grew up with them, but without animation and without the voice work behind them, it gave me the chance to give a more objective look towards these characters. And I know it's a bit of a contradiction saying, you know, my opinion is a bit more objective right now, but let me spit real quick. We have the main crew, which consists of Yusuke, Kuwabara, Kurama, and Hiei. Yusuke is the delinquent who everybody has kind of written off, but has a good soul overall. With him being the main character, you see him grow and mature over time. We also have Kuwabara, who is Yusuke's classmate and rival, and one of my favorite characters. With the weird sixth sense that he was born with, Kuwabara joins Yusuke on his underworld adventures and spirit detective cases. Next is Kurama, who is a reformed demon within a human's body. Having grown around a loving human mother, he changes his ways from evil to good and adds a level-headed, calculated member to the group. Last up in the main four, we got is Hiei, who is a self-absorbed, sarcastic demon who is forced to work with Yusuke since he is on probation. Now, outside of those four, we have Botan, the Grim Reaper, who's also the assistant to Yusuke and Koenma. We also have Koenma, who is King Yema's son and also the person to direct Yusuke on what to do. Last character out of the protagonists is Genkai, Yusuke's mentor, who is an old short lady but has a fine grasp on using spirit energy and eventually passes the torch to Yusuke. Now we gotta talk about the two main antagonists, Toguro and Sensui. There are other antagonists here and there, but these are the only two antagonists that actually have a saga dedicated towards them. These characters are both great adversaries for Yusuke as they challenge him physically, mentally, and psychologically. Togashi knows how to craft villains when he really needs to, but I gotta be real with y'all. He kind of dropped the ball on what could have been the best antagonist of all time in anime. Toguro is a character who opposes Yusuke, seeming to be pure evil but also far superior to Yusuke physically. He's the first person we see push Yusuke over the edge and makes him assume his protector role. Toguro's backstory on the reasoning of why he wants to fight Yusuke and the way he is also masterfully done. At least in the anime. We'll talk more about that in the writing and plot section. Now we go to Sensui, who I feel has such a great setup and could have been a really good opposing force to Yusuke, but Togashi kind of drops the ball with him. Sensui is Yusuke's predecessor, with him being a spirit detective years before Yusuke. We see the Tolle has taken on Sensui, with him witnessing the pure evils of human nature and seeing that even humans can be worse than demons, the people he was assigned to deal with. This makes Sensui's sense of black and white justice even stronger and split into 7 personalities to deal with one extremely traumatizing event. Now, where I feel Togashi actually fumbled the bag was in Sensui's backstory. We got little crumbs of who Sensui was, which was enough, but we definitely could have gotten way more. Togashi also fumbled on the fact that this man Sensui had 7 different personalities. You know how much you could have done with that? I don't know about you guys, but I would love to see some interaction, dialogue, or some type of inclusion from most of these personalities. We only get time with 2 or 3 of them, and we are described another one from Itsuki. But I will say that the layers are really there for these 2 guys, and honestly, this is why they're some of my favorite antagonists of all time in anime and manga. Overall, this is probably the biggest section because I have a lot to say about these characters, but that's just because I love them so much. The banter, the interactions, how they play off of one another is greatly done, and I wish I could have just stuck around with them a bit longer. Now, if we gotta talk about the setting, there's 3 main places in this manga: Yusuke's town, the underworld, and the demon plane. And they all have no character. They feel non-existent, and Togashi doesn't ever flesh out or show off these places in the manga. I guess you could kind of say that these places don't really have any soul to them. Oh, wow. Wow, I'm really sorry for that joke. That joke was really bad. In fact, let's just go ahead and continue on with this video on to the next section. The writing it's just alright. I think people hype up the writing in Yu Yu Hakusho way above than what it really is, and like I said, in the artwork department, it's very inconsistent. Now, when Yu Yu first starts off, it doesn't really have a sense of direction besides giving us the basics to prepare us for the upcoming sagas. The first arc was alright, a bit slow in writing, and it includes certain things that are never touched upon again after this saga, even though these things / elements were kind of seen as mainstays. Now let's go ahead and talk about Togashi's writing and my biggest gripe that I have with it. Togashi loves to renege in his writing instead of being brave enough to follow through with certain decisions he makes. Togashi often writes himself out of huge stakes situations with later on decisions that either lessen or cheapen the actual quality of what proceeded before. A few examples I have are Kuwabara's death, Genkai's death, Elder Togoro's death, and Yusuke's death against Sensui, to name a few. These moments have such great emotional impact and weight on the characters and the reader, but is later written out by some new element Togashi randomly implements last minute to keep the status quo. Now this pissed me off because I felt at no point in this manga there were really any real stakes for our heroes. Another thing I hated was Togashi giving such a huge plot convenience to the villains. It's alright to foreshadow these upcoming events because then we can see Togashi at least planned ahead for these later moments, but Togashi would abruptly add this new or never heard of information until it's time to use it. For example, Togoro's backstory and purpose is only explained after he's chosen to endure 10,000 years of torment, then to cease existing afterwards. Literally, if you take out this whole interaction with Koenma, Togoro could still just be seen as a power-hungry antagonist who is pure evil. This also leads to the off-camera talk that Togoro had with Koenma to keep Genkai's body preserved so she could be brought back to life after the tournament. Another moment I have is when Sensui is being overpowered by Yusuke, but then busts out this holy chi. We ain't never heard of this holy chi until this moment. This would have been a different story if this holy chi was brought up during earlier sagas, but it's never heard of until Sensui uses it, and this causes him to overthrow Yusuke in the battle. Ooh, just thinking about this pisses me off. And my last moment I gotta talk about for this topic has to be Yusuke being part demon. Oh, for the love of God! This, just like the holy chi, came completely out of nowhere. There were no signs of it, there was no hinting at it. No! Togashi didn't know how to continue with Sensui killing Yusuke, so he decided to randomly just make him a demon and give him a transformation on top of that. See what I mean when I say no stakes? BS like this pisses me off, especially when I'm reading a battle shonen like these. Another problem I have with this manga is that it moves very fast at times where it needs to slow down and let the weight of certain emotional scenes really sink in. This made me feel that we were supposed to just brush this off, but certain moments that were rushed over were definitely used and heavily emphasized in the anime in a very good way. And lastly, I know I talked down a lot on Togashi's writing, but one thing I could really give him is his theming. While Togashi doesn't necessarily catch the vibe of Yu Yu well enough like the anime, his theming and choices of which to use are very strong and well executed in the manga. My favorite theme has to be that even though the spirit detectives are supposed to keep humans safe from demons, even some humans can be more evil than demons and do extreme harm to others. This was executed masterfully, and Togashi deserves something for this even to this day. Overall, the manga puts a nasty taste in my mouth for Yu Yu Hakusho, and I hate that I'm even saying that out loud. Yu Yu was something I grew up on, and the anime is still in my top 5 of all time, but this manga right here is not a good representation for the series. This is still a legacy series and definitely a juggernaut that later on went to establish the Big Three's Bleach with obvious homages that were just executed in its successor better. Yu Yu Hakusho's anime adaptation heavily elevates the manga material where sometimes the manga could be unbearable. The art isn't consistent, the dark vibe / atmosphere isn't captured well, and the emotional moments have close to no soul, sadly. But I'd be lying to you by saying I hate this. Some of the action captured me, the artistic choices Togashi made on the villains captivated me, and I have to say, this manga flows well when it wants to flow well. Yu Yu Hakusho is a series I now love and hate at the same time, so I have to give Yu Yu Hakusho a 7 out of 10. What is he doing in there?
In the countryside, I wander far and wide. The isolation gets me again. I don't know where to go.
Hey man, what are you? This song is good, but let me put you on to some better heat.
Grand Tour, GT. Step into the Grand Tour, Step into the Grand Tour, Dragon Ball GT. Step into the Grand Tour, Dragon Ball GT.
Ooh, this song is heat. Man, you feel, what are you doing with that? What are you doing with that?
Know how I'm coming, and they know what we hate. Run around through that